This Week in Defense News with Vago Muradian.
Good morning and welcome to This Week in Defense News. I'm Vago Muradian.
Covering fire!
The U.S. Army is the best equipped ground force in history thanks to the service's Research, Development, and Engineering Command. We'll talk to that command's deputy chief later in the program. But first, the recent turmoil on Wall Street and Capitol Hill topped headlines and newscasts last week. What will it all mean for defense spending in the coming months and in the next administration? To answer that question, we talked to Congressman John Murtha, chairman of the House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee.
Without the crisis, there was going to be reduced defense spending as the war wound down. Historically, I've never seen a period where you didn't have a reduced defense spending. Cold War, you could say, well, there wasn't a war, but there was a Cold War. So we increased spending when Reagan came in substantially more than people anticipated he would.
And the process started under Carter.
Yeah,
really.
Exactly. Now, what we have to look at is what needs to be done. For instance, the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have everything they need. They have the equipment they need, body armor, anything that for a while they didn't, but they do now. We have all the hospital benefits, medical benefits they need. The problem is the equipment in the United States. 90% of the units are unequipped to go to war, to sustain a deployment. And many of the facilities at home are not adequate. The O&M money that we spend. So what do you say? You look out there and you say, if something happens like it happened in Georgia, what are we going to be able to do? I've talked about this to all the leaders in the military, Admiral Mullen included, saying, look, we got to sustain ourselves. We have to have a 4 or 5 year picture of how we're going to fund these things. So if you're going to continue to increase the Army, continue to increase the Marine Corps, where are you going to get the money to do the other things that are necessary, like procurement of ships? They need 10 ships a year in order to get the 313. The 400 airplanes, 200 of those are UAVs. Rehabilitate, reset equipment. Where are you going to get the money? Well, you're going to have to reduce personnel costs. That's the only place you can get it. The pressure on us is going to be so great. Now you saw in this bailout how the pressure from people who were against it, they deluged the offices, so it failed in the House. Well, the same thing's going to happen when we get into a new president. The new president's going to be forced to look at medical care. It's going to, in other words, health care for everyone, Social Security, Medicare. And the military, as we wind down from Iraq, is going to be less, it's off the front page. Nobody hears about it.
So it's going to be a huge crash between discretionary and non-discretionary and programs, or what you fear the money is going to come out of.
And most of our money is discretionary money, except for the personnel, which is about 35% of the budget. But I'm trying to stabilize industry. I'm trying to convince the Defense Department and the industry, okay, let's decide on which weapon systems we need, how we're going to look at them, and let's buy them up in a quantity that we save some money.
Which are the ones you think that can be traded away by the next administration, and which are the ones that must be kept?
Well, I think the 22 is going to fall by the wayside after this next year. I think the 17 will finally stop. So I think you're going to see two lines in the Air Force. That's going to be the 30s, or the 35,
the Joint Strike Fighter,
the Joint Strike Fighter, and the tankers. That's going to be the two lines for the Air Force. Now, our big problem is FCS, and your years of experience with the Army, you know what we're talking about. $160 billion. Now that's an estimate. They had $2 billion in. I went out to look at it at Fort Bliss. I saw some programs I thought were worthwhile. I said to General Casey and to Pete Guerin, fellas, you got to make a decision here. Either you upgrade the requests, you put them in place earlier, you take money away from something else, or you're never going to get there. Because if you spend a couple $1 billion a month, all of us will be dead before you get to the point you want to get.
So that's a program that's likely going to see some scale back, you think?
And what you're going to see is, instead of buying the vehicles, they're going to upgrade the equipment that we have now, reset and rehabilitate the equipment, and I don't think you'll see them buying much. Even though there's less maintenance costs, the money just won't be there to do it. I don't see it.
DDG 1000, do you think that lives, or is that over with at this point?
We're going to fund the 1000 for this year. We're going to look at it again next year, put a little bit of money in for the 51, and then we're going to see which direction we're going to go. We got to have a better vision of what the threat is. We have a threat assessment every year before we have our hearings. And then we try to build into that threat assessment what we need for the next 2 or 3 years. And right now, and I was just out to the hospital at Bethesda today visiting 2 Marines. One of them had lost his leg, and the other one had his leg hurt badly in almost hand-to-hand combat. And so, you know, these guys have almost been forgotten in what's going on. One young fellow had been deployed 6 times. The families suffer from these deployments. And so we have to take care of the increased cost of taking care of the troops physically, mentally. PTSD is going to cost a lot. I put $900 million in the budget, as you know, for PTSD and for brain damage just last year. We put some more money in this year. Those are the kind of things going to eat up an awful lot of the defense budget in the years to come. So we've got to decide, is there a real threat? Do we need to sustain this large army? Can we put more emphasis on the National Guard? We added over $1 trillion or $1 billion to the National Guard in the supplemental in this bill, add them both together, because we think you're going to have to depend on the National Guard. We can't afford to have as large a regular force as we have now because the volunteer force is so much more expensive. I'm personally for a draft. I think we should have a draft. I think that everybody's going to have an opportunity to serve this great country.
Secretary Gates has been talking about that it's more of a low-intensity threat and that we don't really have to worry as much about a peer competitor. What's your view on that?
Well, the Secretary sent me a 5-page letter. I just got it today. And he says, you and I are not, we're all saying the same things. It's just that we have to concentrate now on the low-level threat. But I agree with you. We have to look at the long-term sustainability and re-equipping of our forces. So he and I now see it the same way.
So you think that there is a recognition of what happened with Russia going into Georgia, rising China, and other dangers? Well,
if you want to prevent a war, you better be prepared. And we are not prepared to prevent a war right now, and everybody knows it. You know, they always worry about what we say. It's not a matter of what we say, it's what we do and have available.
Are we capable of doing major military operations at this point? For example, even in Iran?
No, we are not. You could have nuclear attack. You could have air attacks. It's the ground forces that don't have the capability, because we've put all the equipment into Iraq. They don't even have the equipment to train on before they go to Iraq, the same kind of equipment they have when they're in Iraq. So, and Afghanistan's the same thing. This young fellow this morning I talked to was deployed 6 times, and he's in a Special Forces unit in the Marine Corps. But as a whole, we're wearing out our forces, and in the meantime, we're depleting the readiness of the ground forces at home.
You mentioned tankers. One of the solutions that you proposed was to buy both of the airplanes. I mean, because the Air Force obviously has gotten into some trouble with the entire tanker program over the years. Secretary Gates has said that's a non-starter. What's the way forward on solving this problem?
He says it's a non-starter because of the cost, and I understand that. I'm willing to buy or recommend to the subcommittee and in the full committee that we buy 2 per month. Now, the way it would work that I suggest is since Northrop is ready to go forward first, we'd buy them from them. Then the second tanker we'd buy from Boeing maybe 2 or 3 years later. He says the maintenance costs would be so expensive. Well, I've got the staff looking at how much the maintenance costs are for the old ones. They told us 4 or 5 years ago, these things will only last a couple more years. And then all at once, they're going to be all right for 4 or 5 more years. They're almost as old as you are.
Well, I think they're actually older than I am, sir. One last question on F-22. The administration has tried to kill it. You said that its days or program are numbered. Is it time to allow foreign countries, whether it's Japan, Israel, or somebody else, to buy it, to maintain the option to buy more in the future? Or do you think that it's too important a capability?
Yeah, the 22 we can't afford to sell. The F-35, we're going to sell a lot of them. I would guess the figure will be over 3,000 of the 35. The LCS is going to save us, as is the 35. Those are the 2 systems I think we'll buy a lot of.
The littoral combat ship, the Navy's new small ship.
Because it's going to be a lot more than the original said, as all these systems are, but it's going to be reasonable enough we can afford to buy them in quantity.